So off we go. So should you feel like you should reach to me, you can reach me in one of these things. You want PowerPoint, you want anything of that in academic side on general surgery, just note this down, because I would appreciate you to concentrate on what I'm going to speak. Most of the things what I'm going to speak will be essentially what you have been already knowing or what you have already read. My job is here to only to align you and focus you again. So this presentation or this talk is going to cover about an overview of dermal and subdermal swellings, how to define a lesion, and what are the investigations in the, if it is needed, or what is the right treatment. And there are very few dermal and subdermal swellings which may warrant a little bit of surveillance and follow-up also. So the principal things what I'm going to cover up this evening will be a little bit about sebaceous, little bit about lipoma, dermoids, neurofibroma, and vascular lesion. Essentially, for us, when we are going to sit for the final MBBS examination, these things are going to be your short cases or spotters, depending on whether you're going to have an online exam. I hope all of you, this batch will have regular exams, hopefully once this pandemic comes to an end, or you should be prepared to face the exams online as well. So this will be a very, very common question whenever you have a skin lesion or a dermal lesion. What are the layers of the skin? This will be the common question. So it is epidermis, dermoepidermal junction. You have the papillary dermis, you have the reticular dermis and subcutaneous. So you remember EDPRS. ED is epidermis, dermoepidermal junction, and then PRS, papillary dermis, reticular dermis, and then subcutaneous tissue. So these are the things you should have. And most of the swellings or troubles what we are going to face arises from one of the structures here. You can see sebaceous gland, you can see arteries, you can see veins, you have nerve fibers, you have shaft of hair are coming out, sweat gland outlet. See, if you can understand these fundamentals, that making a diagnosis is not at all going to be difficult for you. So most of these cases, you will have a very short time. You may not require to prepare a case sheet, or if you are asked to write, you can write about little bit about how to tell or how to have a sequential presentation to your examiners. Sometimes when, of course, when we did our exams, the examiners just made the patient to sit before them, and then they were asked to tell the important finding, or sometimes they asked us to demonstrate one signs or symptoms. Very rarely you may be asked to go through the entire sequence of history also. So depending on your examiners, you mostly you'll be given 10 to 15 minutes time. You please wait for the Tamil Nadu MGR Doctor Medical University, how this pattern is going to change this year, because this batch may end up having a online exam rather than having a regular exam. So you should be prepared for that format. So at this point of time, you will be given 15 minutes time, so that, see, you should have the habit of examining and collecting the history in short case. In long case, you will have time to do the history part separately, examination part, and you will have writing time also. In short case, that is the only challenge. But then short case are clear decision makers. If a long case is not so well, the more time you spend with the examiner, then sometimes they may ask something which you may not agree, or the examiner may not agree the way what you answer. But short cases, you don't have that challenge fairly. The examiners are going to not have much of a challenge whenever you answer the right way. So we'll go into the history as such. A very brief history should cover duration of the lesion, how did it start, and when it starts with some symptoms. The principal thing will be the pain, progression, and as much as possible, try to figure out the exact site, either with the bony landmark or with the which finger, where exactly in the neck. So all these things are important. Whenever you are talking about history of the pain, nature of the pain, where exactly is the pain, over the lesion or around the lesion or next joint or wherever, depending on what it is. And then the time of onset. See, the swelling came first or the pain came first. And character of the pain also need to be worked on. Then as you go on, these things may or may not be relevant. You have to be judiciously finding time to ask these questions. You can ask for systemic symptoms, especially when there is associated inflammation. signs of malignancy, or then when there are signs of injury, this can be also be looked at. The most important things for the dermal and subdermal swellings, you have to look for and ask for presence of other lumps. You also look for the secondary changes. See, when you have a sebaceous, when you have a dermite, you may end up having a secondary changes. And then impairment of function. This one we commonly forget. I have also forgot during my exams, and the examiner pointed to me. So you should be aware if there is a lesion, if there is a shoulder lesion, just ensure you tell about the movement. The joints below and above are working normally, or if you have pain to the patient, you tell the patient is restricted with pain. So these are the things you have in mind. And as you come down, you should also be see if there is a recurrent swelling. Recurrence can be at a new place, or recurrence can be from the residual tumor which is left behind, which is coming up. And then of course, little bit on the constitutional things like body weight, little bit about the personal history, depending on it. So with that and loud, now we move on to the characteristics of the lesion. So one thing is, as you see the patient, you will also ascertain what is surrounding the lesion, physical characteristics of the lesion. And when you visualize these two things, you should have in your mind what are the histological characteristics of the lesion, which can be asked at the exam if you are doing very well. So we move on to the inspection. This is a very famous multiple S's, 6X or 4S or 5S or whatever. But the S's you should not forget. So whenever I would say, when you do a general surgery review, I would say spend some time, either if you are a late sleeper, do it as the last part of the day, or when you are an early riser in the morning, just have a, I would say, we used to have finger cards, like your playing cards are there, right? So something like that you maintain. So every day you keep it like your credit card, just bookmark, just run these few things. Same thing for medicine, same thing for pediatrics. Pediatrics, you end up have the nutrition value, calorific value of various food, all those things. These are the things we tend to forget. So a recall every day is very, very useful. Maybe I'll also share to Vasant or to your group the recall cards. So it becomes easy for you to daily recall. It may take 30 seconds of your time, but your mind. See, we have 6 layers of consciousness. The more deeper your memory goes into the 6th layer, people would have been telling, தூக்கத்துல கேட்டா கூட சொல்லணும், when you have to talk, when you ask questions, you should be awoken from sleep, you should be able to answer. Something like that. When you internalize these things, then it becomes easy and it becomes a habit for you. A very simple thing is catch hold of your junior, catch hold of your house surgeon, catch hold of your friends, start presenting a case. So it is the habit how you generate makes you comfortable. So we talk about site, size, shape and extent, surface, edge, number of swellings. These are other things are quite rare, but you should be aware. Pulsation, whether the patient is feeling a pulsation or you could appreciate a pulsation. And then associated peristalsis, not very common in abdominal wall swellings, you should be careful. And what happens to the surrounding structures. Then all these inspectory findings have to be confirmed first before we move on to the special things on the palpation. So the signs of inflammation, pallor, rubor, calor, dolor, all those things very good. Warmth and tenderness are the most important thing whatever examiner will expect to tell. Again, you tell, unless there is a gross change or something, you tell site, size, shape and extent in surface are confirmed. And then if you have an associated thing, slippery edge, non-slippery edge, clear edge, unclear edge, diffuse edge, all those things you need to address to it. And then consistency is the one which will give you most of the times the diagnosis. It can be cystic, can be non-cystic, either if it is a soft lesion. Then when you come to firm lesion, if it is firm, uniformly firm, or at some areas firm, or it is hard. Again, when you come to hard swelling, you mean to say whether it is hard all through, whether it is hard at selective place. A very simple example, see, your upper lip is soft, your nose is firm, your forehead is hard. You moment you are having a confusion, just feel your lip, nose and forehead, you will be able to understand what your dealing is with, whether it is a soft swelling or whether it's a firm swelling or whether it's a hard swelling. Then comes your pulsation and fluctuation. These things are matter in soft swellings alone. Fluctuation, especially when it is a very fine swelling, cross fluctuation can be attempted. And then if it is a huge swelling, then you can have by digital or with both the hands you can attempt to do a fluctuation. Pulsations of course depends on whether it is a vascular origin or if it is sitting over an important blood vessel, then you can talk about pulsation. Pulsation can be either the entire lesion is pulsating or pulsation can be transmitted pulsation. So we move on little more. Fluid thrill is a elicited thrill. It is not a naturally occurring one. You elicit a fluid thrill. That's how it works. Then you may need to have a barrier, and then that's how you pick up and do the fluid thrill part of it. Translucency, yes, cystic hygroma, lymphangiomas, and if the hydrocele sac is very thin, you can get to have a translucency. Do not forget, you carry a scrotoscope or a luminoscope or something like that for doing a translucency test. And in exam, you may not be given an opportunity to borrow from others. So please be aware of it. Give me a moment. Thank you. So as we go down, the translucency we have finished. Cough impulse. Again, a presence or absence of cough impulse means it is communicating to a hollow cavity. It can be to the chest or it can be to the cranium or it can be to the abdominal cavity. When you talk about cough impulse, it can be a mere presence of cough impulse. Most of the cough impulses are expansile cough impulse. And then when there is a cough impulse, you should talk about reducibility. When it is a soft swelling, not reducible, talk about the compressibility. So compressibility is continuous persistent pressure makes the swelling to disappear. This obviously means there is a vascular connection. Most of the time hemangiomas. And then fixity to overlying skin. If it is a dermal thing, it is part of the skin appendage, then it will be fixed. Whether the fixity is all through, whether it is fixed at a particular part should be helping you to make a decision. And then what are the special relations to the surrounding structures? Whether the skin surrounding structures are fine. So depending on all these things, we will go one by one to address to it. Pressure effect can be local or pressure effect can be pressing to the nerve which is supplying to the entire arm. So patient can have wasting of muscle. Pressure effect can be local if it is a dermoid cyst, if it is indenting into the scapula, if the bone is eroded, that is local effect. The pressure effect can be beyond. It can compress the blood vessel. The limb can be little cold and ischemic, or if it is on the nerves, it can be neuropathic and eventually having palsy or paresis. And then examination of the nearby joints will obviously mean one joint below and one joint above. If something is there in the forearm, you examine the wrist, you examine the elbow. That's how it works. Auscultation and percussion may or may not be significant, especially when you're dealing with the dermal and subdermal swelling. But of course, if you're going to deal with a very clear AV fistula or AV malformation, auscultation may help you to pick up a machinery type of murmur or a pistol shot murmur. Percussion, if it is you want to have a umbilical hernia or one of the hernias, then percussion comes of help to understand whether you are dealing with a hollow viscous or a omental tissue or something else. So now we have dealt with the entire gamut of what is there in the lesion. Now we move outside the lesion. So outside the lesion principally refer to the attributes and conditions of the patient beyond the main lesion. So what are the things you should know? The lesion can be inflamed. The lesion can be multiple. There can be associated neurovascular changes. This is a recollect of whatever I have said, but make a point. The local lesion, immediate surrounding city, do not miss out on multiplicity of the lesion, and then do not miss out on the distal neurovascular changes. These are the few things which we were also prone to miss when we were students like you. We'll go now one by one. What is a sebaceous cyst? The first thing an exam will ask, why do you say it's a sebaceous cyst? So you should have very clear answer. So there should not be any fumbling on these issues, right? When you're going to ask about what is the chromosome which is having mutation to have sebaceous cyst, then the examiner may not find fault. But when there is going to be a question on definition, you should be very, very clear in answering the question so that the examiner gets convinced, okay, this boy or girl has fine and she has understood the subject. So it means a blocked sweat gland usually has a punctum, and skin at the summit alone close to the punctum is not pinchable. Rest of the lesions are pinchable. There are exceptions where these things cannot be pinchable: when there is inflammation, when there is long standingness, when they are close to the skin, when your skin and underlying muscles are very firm. These are the areas where you will not have pinchable skin. So what are the other names? You can, or other names are a close differential diagnosis. Because it is arising from the epidermis, it is called epidermoid cyst. When it is associated hair follicle, typical same presentation, looks like sebaceous cyst. The pathologist may write it is a pilar cyst or a tricholemmal cyst. And then really when it is happening in the sweat gland as such, they may say true sebaceous cyst, otherwise medically called as steatocytoma or steatocystoma. So the next question is, why do somebody get a sebaceous cyst? It is because of the blocked sweat glands. People may end up telling it is a swelling of the hair follicle, many things. And then one other question you should be aware is, what is the possible infection which is common in sebaceous cyst? The Dermatobia hominis or Demolex follicularum. These are the two things which can be coexisting on this. And the next common question is, what are the syndromes associated with sebaceous cyst, which is commonly Gardner syndrome and Basel-Neves syndrome. Then the next important question people will be bugging you with this content of sebaceous cyst. What are the contents? There can be little fibrous elements, can be body fluids, tissue fluids, and most common or most important large content is the fatty keratinous substance. If you have seen a case being operated in your OT or one of your assistant professors or senior PGs are operating, moment they open the sebaceous cyst, you will have a cheesy food odor. I would say once you see the inhale the smell and your mind gets conditioned to it, you will never be able to forget the smell. And next time when you see, you just get the smell, you will be able to get into the possibility of moment, even without seeing the lesion, there is going to be someone which is going to tell what is the, you are going to operate with the sebaceous cyst. And then if it is infected, you may have serosanguinous and purulent material. Now we move to little bit different lesions. Where are the common locations of the sebaceous cyst? Scalp, ears, face, back, forearms, chest, and scrotum. They will ask where all sebaceous cysts cannot come. Then you should be aware to tell palm and soles, you do not get it. And then this is yet another reason where can you get multiple sebaceous cysts? Yes, you can get multiple sebaceous cysts. So most commonly seen in scrotum. Here again, you may not be able to get the skin pinchable if there is a question onto you asking where is the sebaceous cyst, where skin is not pinchable, where you do not have punctum. These are the exceptions where in scrotum you don't see to this formula, but mere presence and aggregated sebum inside every cyst, it is evident. So what is the other name for this thing? It is called Vens. Vens is the especially multiple sebaceous cysts in the scrotum is called Vens. So the next question comes to you, what are the complications of sebaceous cyst? The most important complication is infection, ulceration, sebaceous horn. That obviously means calcification of the content of the sebaceous cyst. And then as you go more and more neglecting with the sebaceous cyst, you can end up having Cox peculiar tumor. And then rare, you can have calcification of the content. And very rarely, don't end up telling this as a first complication, becoming malignant. So what are the signs of infection in a sebaceous cyst? It turns painful, you don't get the skin pinchable, it becomes adherent to the local structures, then the becomes a pultaceous material, becomes a semi-liquid content. At times, it can be ratty or mousy odor, or it can be like a foul smelling discharge can be there. And then these type of sebaceous cysts, when you get infected, you don't get a plane, you don't get to see a punctum, but then it also happened to be a sebaceous cyst. Depending on the location, it varies. Then little bit about Koch's peculiar tumor. Very rarely you get this as a short note. So who identified this? This was done by Edward Koch, not because of a hen or chicken cock. This is identified by a chap called Edward Koch. He himself is a surgeon from the famous Guy's Hospital in London. And then it is typically typically told ulceration of the sebaceous cyst, or it resembles like an epithelioma. What is epithelioma? Squamous cell carcinoma. That's how it is. It is a mimicker, or it is a masquerader. Then what really happens in sebaceous horn? The content gets opened out close to the punctum or at the punctum, and it becomes very slowly coming out. It is neglection. If you could see, this chap had a sebaceous horn because the sebum is slowly coming up. The skin also gets cornified. This pathema, if you see, this is, you can see the entire thing is sebaceous thing, but as and where the sebum comes out, this is absolute neglection. People end up having this. So otherwise, depending on the location and depending on the way it looks, yes, it can be called as sebaceous horn. Otherwise, if the examiner wants to know what is the other name for this, it is cornucutaneum. Then as you move, it's a skin lesion made of compacted keratin that forms an exophytic conical projection. What are the other ways to call, or what are the associated differential diagnosis of sebaceous cyst? Then actinic keratosis, seborrheic keratosis. This can be, when it is long-standing, can be benign verrucae, inverted follicular keratosis, and squamous cell carcinoma. You can tell it as associated diagnosis or associated complication. Then we move on to the next important diagnosis. Having dealt with sebaceous cyst, now we move on to the next common case, which can be kept for your OP discussion or a short case, is lipoma. What is a lipoma? The most benign, common benign tumor. Most of them are composed of adipose tissue. What are the background of lipoma? So it can be inherited. What is the reason? What is the name of inheritance? What is the type of familial inheritance called? Familial multiple lipomatosis. What is the type of mutation? HMG1C. And the next important question the examiner is going to ask you, why do you say it is a lipoma? So all through skin is pinchable. This freely mobile has to be qualified depending on where it is. If it is on the tummy, it may be freely mobile. If it is on the forearm or something, it can be moving with little bit of restriction. And then the most important thing is they may not get restricted on stretching of the fascia or contraction of the muscle. That obviously means it is above the muscle or above the fascia. So by putting the fascia or muscle into contraction, you don't get to see any restriction of the movement. So how all it can present clinically? Most of the time it's a globular swelling. Don't tell it's a round swelling. Don't tell it's a spherical swelling. It can be ovoid or it can be globular because it has an attachment. So then you get to see lobulated swelling. See, lobulated means there can be lobules which need not be a very clear cut. See, what is boscillation? Boscillation is multiple small firm swellings next to next. You have a clear boundary between one firm swelling to other firm swelling, it becomes boscillation. If it is lobulation, you imagine a cluster of grapes, close your eyes and touch the grapes, you have soft swellings one over the other, that is called lobulation. Very, very rarely lipoma becomes painful. Most of the lipomas are painless. It has slippery edges. See, when you walk in a rain, in a muddy road, what do? Even whatever good your shoes or whatever good your slippers, it slips. So when you touch at the edge of the swelling slips out of your feet. Then pseudo fluctuation. We'll deal one by one. So what is pseudo fluctuation? This is a very typical differentiating finding from other swellings. In lipoma, because of its soft consistency and fatty nature, it gives an impression of fluctuation. See, we discussed about fluctuation some time back. So it can be very small swelling, stabilized swelling in between two fingers, press in the center. where your fingers go sideways. This is to elicit small swelling. If it is a big swelling, hold like this, press like this. If you press here, this side opens up. So that's how you feel fluctuation or cross fluctuation. But here, because of its soft consistency and the fatty nature, it gives the impression of fluctuation, but you may or may not appreciate a true fluctuation. In reality, this is not a true fluctuation, as there is no fluid, because fat is liquid when in warm condition, but here lipoma is solid fat, so it's why called pseudo fluctuation. So where all you can have lipoma? Where are the locations? Subcutaneous, subfacial, subsynovial, submucosal, intraglandular, intermuscular, intramuscular, extradural. Just take a time to internalize. I'm going to read it for you once more. Subcutaneous, subfacial, subsynovial, submucosal, intraglandular, intermuscular, intramuscular. Intermuscular is between two muscles. Intramuscular is inside one muscle group of fibers. Extradural is cranial. Then you have combinations. What are the combination? You can have associated nearby tissue. When there are combination with vascular elements, it becomes nevolipoma. When do you get a painful lipoma? It becomes, when a lipoma becomes painful, it can be called adiposis dolorosa or a painful lipomatosis. The named disease associated with this is Derkham's disease. Evaluation, they may not ask. Most of the time, you don't need any big evaluation. Mostly clinically, it is confirmatory. Ultrasound and MRI may be required when there is a doubtful, or when they are close to the joints, you may require ultrasound or MRI. What ultrasound you use? You use a high frequency probe. What is a normal frequency probe? It becomes 3 to 7 megahertz. Anything more than 10 megahertz up to 20 megahertz, if it is very close to the skin, you use a high frequency probe. It is deep into the tummy, you are looking for a gallbladder, you are looking for the uterus or ovary, then becomes normal frequency probe. So then comes a MRI. If it is one investigation which is essential, or if you are asked for how to diagnose a lipoma, then you tell about, I will do one investigation, say I'll do an MRI. MRI is good for soft tissue. CT scan is good for bony tissue. Remember that way. FNAC, most of the time it is not needed. But if there is an element of associated suspicion of tumor, then becomes a requirement of FNAC. Most of the time, excision is the confirmation of diagnosis. So if they are going to ask, is there a special stain for lipoma? Stain for the fatty tissue is Sudan black, typical of honeycombing appearances. Moment the pathologist reads through this, they may tell instantly it is lipoma. Any swelling you operate and remove from a patient has to be sent for histological examination. Even if it is very evident clinically, very evident operatively, it is mandatory for you to send the lesion for anything which is removed from the body, has to be sent to the pathologist, and the pathologist should confirm, yes, what you have diagnosed is right and what you have removed is right, what you have removed is adequate, whether the patient is going to need a follow-up, or whether the patient and the patient family need to be screened for something. It is the input what the pathologist is going to give, which is important. Then there are some very peculiar lipomas. So this is called pedunculated lipoma. So this patient, otherwise medically called as lipoma arborescens. So these type of lipomas can also exist. Then the next important thing is, they may ask you where all you get intraglandular lipoma. So intraglandular lipomas are, you get to see in pancreas, you get to see in renal capsule, and you can get to see in breast tissue. Then where can lipoma give erosion of the bone? Yes, you can have subepicranial lipomas. See, don't jump into telling all these things. These are all definitely, when you're done well, they may ask you. Most of them, when there is a swelling and associated erosion of the bone, it can be a potential differential diagnosis of dermoid. But then this is the only one condition where you expect a erosion of bone in a lipoma, where it is subepicranial lipomas. So the next important thing is, what are the complications of lipoma? Most of the time it's pressure effects. I told you Pressure effects can give arterial, venous, and nerve-based things. And very rarely, when these things happen for a longer time, the limb can be becoming ischemic, neuropathic, or vasculogenic changes can happen. And eventually, when neurovascular compromise happens, it becomes muscular wasting also. And then as we move on, what are the other complications of lipoma? They can have myxomatous degeneration. You can have saponification. Dystrophic calcification can have. When the lipoma grows up fast and where they do not have a space, or when there is a trauma to the lipoma, you can have fat necrosis. And what is the type of malignancy you can expect when there is a long-standing lipoma or a very rapidly growing lipoma? Then you have to talk about sarcoliposarcoma. So this is a diffuse multifocal lipoma or lipomatosis. Again, lipoma can be, you can see it is in the chest wall, you can see in the occiput, can be in the lumbar region. These are the abdominal things where you should be careful. That is where you have to elicit for the cough impulse, because this could be, what is the potential differential diagnosis for this? This could be a lumbar hernia. Should be aware of it. Then what are the close associated condition? So lipomatosis, as we roughly saw, and otherwise when it is painful or inflamed, it becomes adiposis dolorosa. And sometimes you can have multiple symmetrical, one on the right side, one on the left side. Otherwise, you can have Madelung's disease also together. This is a very typical example of excised lipoma. If you could see, you excise with the capsule. You don't get to see any fatty tissue separately. It should be excised in one go. Why? Because a residual lipomatous tissue can recur again or can regrow. So essentially, you have to remove the lipoma with the capsule. So is there any way a patient tells, doctor, I want to remove this lipoma, but I don't want operation? What can be done? You can do a liposuction. And very rarely, if the examiner wants to know, can you give some injection to make the lipoma disappear? Yes, it can be done for a very small lipoma. What type of injection you want to give? You want to give an injection phosphatidylcholine. Then comes the next important thing where diagnosis is written on its face. So it is neurofibromatosis. Fibromatosis is very easy to diagnose. Fibroma is the challenge to diagnose. So what is the important hereditary association? It is a Mendelian dominant variety. It arises from the connective tissue of the nerve sheath, where in the connective tissue it arises from the endoneurium. So what are the types of neurofibroma? They can be solitary, they can be generalized, there can be plexiform type of neurofibromatosis, and it can be associated with gigantism or elephantiasis neurofibromatosa. And very rarely you can get all the neurofibroma coming in the cutaneous zone where you don't get to see a pedunculated stuff. There also is multiple neurofibromatosis is possible. So we'll go one by one. Give me a minute. So a solitary neurofibroma can be a rounded swelling adjacent to a nerve, along the nerve, or replacing the nerve. These are the three things: adjacent, along, replacing. So where all it can come? It can come from the cranial, one of the cranial nerves, along the dorsal root or the ganglion, neural ganglion, or it can be intramuscular. What are the types of neural symptoms it can give? It can produce weakness or compression of the nerve, and it can produce paresthesia. What are the long-term changes? The neurofibroma can have cystic degeneration, and very rarely it can become turn malignant. So what are the other syndromes associated with generalized neurofibromatosis? Von Recklinghausen's disease is a very important MCQ question. People who are preparing now, I want not people who are preparing, everybody to prepare for your NEET PG right away. Don't wait for your final exam. Don't wait for your house residency to get over. Whatever you study as theory, imagine what are the potential exam questions which can be asked from it. So this is one of the very famous and popular MCQ question for NEET exam. So you should be aware. It is otherwise called the von Recklinghausen's disease. Inheritance is autosomal dominant. What are the associated troubles you can face? FEO can be, presphenochromocytoma can be there, associated skin tags, You can have neuromas or dumbbell neuromas. Very rarely, you can have cafale macules also, otherwise called associated with pigmentation. It is called cafale macule. So what is the treatment? Most of the times they don't need a treatment. When the patient comes to you, it is usually not for the swelling. Either it can be a cosmetic effect or it can be associated trouble. So when the patient comes with a large swelling or a swelling which is recently started growing, when it is a very painful swelling, or when there is associated pressure symptoms, or the patient is not able to write or not able to use his joints, and when there is element of suspicion, you go ahead with the resection. Then we move on to plexiform neurofibroma. So excessive overgrowth of neural tissue in the subcutaneous fat. Which is the commonest nerve to get plexiform neurofibroma? Fifth nerve. So where all it is seen? Can be seen mostly in the fifth nerve distribution. Occasionally in scalps and extremities also it can be seen. So it's very typical fifth nerve distribution. And of course, this is a scrotal neurofibroma. You can also see down there. Now we move on to the next important short case or the dermal swelling, dermoid. So the first common question is, what is a dermoid cyst? It is an inclusion of epithelium buried at the line of embryonic fusion. So you should be aware, all of you should know where is the line of fusion. It can be in the midline, it can be specific lines along the orbit, around the ears, along the milk line. So all these things are definite embryological lines of fusion. So these are the typical examples. So this is a retroauricular dermoid. This is a supraorbital dermoid or angle of eye dermoid. This is a external angle of the eye, is very typical place of that. And you have a lingual dermoid, under surface of the tongue also. Again, it is a midline of fusion. You can get lingual dermoid. So what is the next important question will come is, what is the content of the dermoid? So depending on what is the cell of origin and what are the structures it has taken into it, can be a stratified squamous epithelium. Depending on the cell line which is going to be covered up, can be hair follicles, sometimes sebaceous gland, sometimes a combination of these things having pultaceous desquamated material. Again, I'm sorry for that, hair has been repeated again. So the common sites of dermoid are midline of neck, external angular dermoids, postauricular dermoids, site of fusion of the skull bones, the suture lines of the skull bones, midline of the face or the root of the nose, right? These are the areas where you can see. So what is the reason someone gets this dermoid? All of us know it arises from the line of embryonic fusion. Very few ectodermal cells are sequestrated into the cyst, and these sequestrated cells proliferate and liquefy to form a cystic swelling. So the next important differential stuff which helps you to exclude from the other swelling is the bony indentation. So these lie, the dermoids lie often close to the mesoderm, from which bones develop. So the next question examiner will ask, why do you get bone indentation? You may not tell, sir, the swelling is there for a long time. No, it is not like that. All the swellings can be there for a long time, but not all swellings have a bone indentation. The principle why a patient gets bone indentation in dermoid is, please take a minute to internalize it. Very, very simple, but very important definition. The dermoids lie often close to the mesoderm, from which bones develop. Hence, they have indentation in the nearby bone. Please understand, they are not the swelling which is eroding the bone. It is at the origin time itself. Then sometimes the cysts start in the mesoderm and have a prolongation of the cyst through the bone. See, they can have prolongation of cysts through the bone, especially the suture lines, thus having an intracranial extension. So these are the two things which can be a bony involvement of a dermoid. So therapy or management of these patients, mostly an X-ray is mandatory to examine the underlying bony indentation, especially when you have a doubt of communication. CT scan is not mandatory, but then in select situation, especially if you are suspecting the dura or the intracranial extension, or if you have midline extension where you are unsure whether it is a only thyroid. So all these type of inclusions have to be excluded by special tests, either by scintigraphy or by CT scan, but they are all very limited values in specific locations. So what is the optimal treatment? Most of the time, they do good with excision. A large dermoid cyst may warrant a flap cover also. Then comes the next, what is the man-made dermoid? So implantation dermoid. Now boys and girls wear many studs, many unusual places, ear boring also. Sometimes they get bored everywhere in the body also. So when you get a boring done, sometimes, especially when you use the boring guns and other devices, where the epidermal tissue gets implanted into through and through, so it becomes an acquired dermoid and arises from an in-driven epithelium, usually a needle trauma. See, when you go to a ear borer, native ear borer, he will just have one sharp needle along with it, take the ear stud and puncture it. That's all. But when you go to a professional, they may have a boring gun or ear gun. Depending on what type of mode you get to use, these things can happen. Where all apart from ear boring, you can get implantation dermoid. A tailor who sews buttons or a gardener can have dermoids which are implanted in palm, fingers, and pulp and sole of the foot, right? So this is a very typical example. The skin may not be pinchable. All through it will be in uniform swelling. Again, because it is in the palm, you may be confused whether it is a firm swelling or a cystic swelling, tensely cystic swelling. These are the challenges. But when you make the muscles to relax, especially the thinner muscles to relax, you will be able to find out whether it moves along with or separately. Then we move on to the tubular dermoids. So tubular dermoids happen because it is happening from unobliterated embryonic duct. Why does it happen? Because it accumulates the secretion of the lining ectodermal cells. What is that? How does a tubular dermoid form? It is the remnant of an unobliterated embryonic duct, accumulation of the secretion of the lining ectodermal cells. Typical examples: thyroglossal cyst, posterior anal dermoid or post-anal dermoid, and you have a ependymal cyst of the brain. The next common question you may have, where all you can get to see a thyroglossal cyst? From the floor of the tongue or the foramen cecum to the suprasternal notch or even to the anterior mediastinum. Where all it is a failure of descent or excess of descent. Can be standalone functioning thyroid, or it can be associated with normal gland and remnant cyst. Usually it traverses through the hyoid bone. So excision of the hyoid is important for thyroglossal cyst. How many channels it form? It can form up till 6 channels from above down. What is the treatment of choice? Central hyoid excision and excision of the tract. So this is a very typical example. You can see the thyroglossal cyst at the top, and as we come down, it is just arrested at the thyroid cartilage. Then we move on to the teratomatous dermoid. Where all teratomatous dermoid happen? This is a totally different thing. Whatever we have been so far speaking is embryological issues. Now what we are going to talk is the arising from the totipotent cells with ectodermal predominance. Where all it can happen? Ovary, testis, mediastinum, retroperitoneum, and postanal dermoid. So in general, what are the types of dermoid? Sequestration, implantation, tubular, and teratomatous. What are the? Then we move on to the hemangioma. I think we are coming to the class. Hope it was not so boring. We are coming to the end of the class. So types of hemangiomas are capillary hemangioma, venous and cavernous hemangioma. If it is full channel, fully formed walls, it becomes venous. If it is a cluster of small veins and venules, it becomes cavernous. Then again, singular artery, it becomes arterial. It becomes a cluster of arterioles, it becomes plexiform type. So what are the typical capillary hemangioma examples? Salmon patch, usually common at birth, can be most commonly seen at forehead and in the occiput. Disappear in less than 1 year of age. So you don't need any treatment. Don't jump into keeping a knife on these children, because most of the time they disappear. But when it is port vein or nevus formation, mostly from birth, they may not change. At a later point of time, as the child grows, there may be associated nodularity. Then you should be aware what is a cercoid aneurysm. So it's a type of AV malformation or AV fistula, where pulsation artery or an arterialized vein is called the next question the examiner will ask is, what is cercoid? So cercoid artery is an arterialized vein that is called a cercoid artery. Where it is commonly seen, it is seen in the superficial temporal artery zone. So these are the examples of port vein stain, strawberry angiomas, and the childhood vascular malformation. So how do you clinically make out a hemangioma? This we have already discussed. To go recap, most of the time it happens in the peripheries, compressibility is there, color can help you, especially a fair skinned person will be able to have a color difference, but a dark complexion person may not have. Associated bruit and thrill can be there when it is situated close to a big vessel or when there is a high flow. And then of course, because of the increased flow, you may have localized gigantism. For people who are very fond of syndromes, a syndrome what is associated with the local gigantism is, especially when there is associated vascular and lymphatic malformation, it is Klippel-Trenaunay syndrome is one of the syndromes where you have all these things. So a little bit about where most commonly seen. So vascular or infantile hemangiomas and vascular malformations, they are proliferative disorders. 30% are only seen at birth. 70% become apparent. So the mom may come and tell, sir, at birth we didn't find anything. Within a month we get to see. More common in girl children, and then rapidly postnatal growth, and most of the time they involute by themselves. So don't, only reassurance is needed at this point of time. So what are the principles or what are the reasons for it? It is an endothelial cell proliferation. Of course, child may keep picking about it. So it is because there is associated increased mast cells. Then I've discussed most of the things, but you should be aware how does a vascular malformation happen. Can be congenital malformation of capillaries, veins, lymphatic vessels, or arteries. So they can be a combination of different types of vessel, lymphovenous, arteriolymphatic, lymphoarterial. So these are the combination. Our most common things are arteriovenous malformation. So how do you stratify these malformation? They can be high flow or it can be low flow depending on the vessel type. So now we have to understand what are the lymphatic classification. So the lymphatic lesions may be further divided into macrocystic, microcystic. So depending on the amount of space, the size of the cystic space which is happening within the lesion can be macrocystic or microcystic lymphatic lesion. And in the case of lymphatic malformation, it always presents along with the, or there is an associated viral upper respiratory infection. Your adenoids, your tonsils are typical lymphoproliferation. Most of the time, once the viral respiratory infection clears, they disappear. These are a few things which you should be aware, not very common in our part of the world, but then you should be aware there is something which can exist like this. So the venous malformations are the most challenging one to handle. Arterial ones are relatively easy, and venous malformation, if you see, you can see it affects the entire facial-maxillary complex. Most of the time, you should know first what is the definition. It is composed of ectatic, poorly organized venous channels that may have normal endothelium, and it lacks the normal smooth muscle architecture. See, you have a vein, you have the supporting appendages. These are the architectural mismatch which is happening in these patients. And most of the time, venous malformation may not be warm, or they may or may not have local gigantism. You could see, but on a long-standing thing, it can definitely damage the entire structural aspects of the face and the mandible, where you can see the tooth and the entire zone becomes crowded and the entire zone becomes disfigured. To close with AV malformation, once again for a reminder, AV malformation are high flow lesions allowing shunting of blood from the arterial system directly into the venous system. They are thought they are residue from failure of primitive vascular communications to obliterate. So what are the types of management of vascular malformation, hemangiomas? Most of the time they are conservative. You don't need any management, and it can be directly injection of sclerosin. What are the typical sclerosin? 100% alcohol. You can have 25% or 50% dextrose. Then of course you need special substances called sodium tetradecyl sulfate, ethanolaminoate. All these things are different examples for sclerosins. Then you have the laser ablations where you have a good infrastructure and a good laser device. Laser gives a good result, but you may have 3 or more sittings also required. If you have the very, very high-end endovascular lab and you have good interventional radiologists, you can attend microembolization also. Surgical excision is to be planned well, especially if it's a large lesion. If you can locate the feeding vessels, it becomes easy. Otherwise, be prepared for a excision and a flap cover. So let us not get into it. Let us not get into it. The closing one, this is yet another thing which can be kept for the exam. So keloid. What is a keloid? It is a fibrotic papillary lesion that usually occur as an aberrant healing response to cutaneous injuries. It can be starting from an acne, any minor trauma, or it can be following a surgical incision or some form of ear piercing. Most common in earlobes, chest, mid-chest, the sternal zone, lower legs, upper back, and the jawline, or even on the shoulders. So one should be aware any trauma or any surgery and the scar becomes up till 1 year, you call as hypertrophic scar. Above which, if it is persistent, it becomes keloid. So unlike hypertrophic scars, hypertrophic scar never crosses. See, you have a midline laparotomy incision. You have some incision which is like a line. The hypertrophic scar is along the scar line alone. But keloid can go beyond the scar line. If you see, there is a small puncture of the earlobe, but you can see the keloid has grown way beyond the puncture zone or the trauma zone. And then most of the time, patient may have intense itching, pain, and most of the time they may complain of paresthesia or burning sensation also. So treatment of keloid, most of the time, if there is a keloid and it is asymptomatic, do not do anything. The next important thing is intralesional injection of corticosteroids. And then if you have huge keloid, you can do an excision and do a skin cover. Why these things are not commonly done? They have at least 40% chance of recurring again, even in the best of the therapy. So this is about the nutshell about the dermal and subdermal swelling. I thank all of you for your patient attendance. I'll be happy to take your few questions. And you have an entire collection of the general surgery cases in this YouTube channel. It is part of our teaching program. It is a PG clinics in general surgery. It is postgraduate standard, but then it starts with undergraduate standard only. So whenever you feel like you are going to present a long case, take time out. This is available all the time in the YouTube channel. We have close to 100 clinical cases which are being presented with faculty across the country. You just type PG clinics in general surgery in YouTube channel and type testicular tumor or gastric CA, stomach or obstructive jaundice or whatever, you have the case listed. You can go through before going for a presentation. So if you again need to reach me, this is my email ID. This is my mobile number. Mobile number is very easy to reach out to me, 9440 and 8330. Anything on general surgery, anything you feel like talking to me or you have a doubt, you want to discuss, you are welcome to do it. So that's about the class. I think I'm just finishing on time. We have another 2-3 minutes to have. Do you have any questions here? Any of the students would like to ask some question? I could see some of you raising your hands. Vasant, how do we take questions, Vasant, here?
அவங்களுக்கு ஏதாவது டவுட் இருந்துச்சுன்னா அவங்களே அட்மிட் பண்ணிட்டு மைக் கேட்பாங்க.
திட்டணும்னாலும் அப்படியே திட்டிடுவாங்களா? என்ன சார் இப்படி போர் அடிக்கிறீங்க அதுவும் சொல்லுவாங்களா?
அதெல்லாம்
அந்த மாதிரி சொல்ல மாட்டாங்களா? நல்ல பசங்களா? I think we have another 2-3 minutes to go before I think Dr. Girish is ready with this pathology lecture. Hi, Girish.
Hi, Dr. Kanagaveru.
How are you? Nice.
I learned a little surgery from you.
Sorry, Girish.
I learned a little surgery.
Oh, that's interesting. This is not much about surgery, Girish. Surgery is definitely little, I think, undergraduate level of basic things. No, we will talk about surgery in the subsequent classes. We are going to escalate it. This is the first class for them, so let them have a grasp about getting into a surgery.
Yeah, that's the first step anyway.
Yes, sir. So, dear students, do we have any questions? Fine. There could be two ways. Either the class is good or you don't feel like asking questions. So to tell, Girish is my batchmate and he always wanted to become a pathologist from the beginning, and he happens to be the has a special interest on neuropathology, and he's from the United States, going to talk to you about a specific zone of pathology, lymphomas. So Asan, can we call it a day?
Yes.
Sure. Bye-bye, students. Have a nice day. So possibly next week we will try to deal about right iliac fossa mass. Vasant has shared few topics from your friends. What are the areas which I'm going to cover? Vasant will be touching upon. Vasant has asked me to do surgical, like nutrition part of it, surgical nutrition. And I'll be talking about right iliac fossa mass. What else, Vasant, if you can recall? I just slipped out of my mind.
Sutures are not dressings in
Yeah,
CR, right?
so we are finished with the dermal and subdermal swellings. You want surgical nutrition. You want sutures and knots, how to do a good dressing, and management of ulcers. Right.
Yes,
These are the things I'm going to cover. And of course, examination of short cases. Maybe we can even have a clinical class. Maybe after some time, once you get some clinical cases, we can have a few of you to present the case and then come to a reasonable conclusion so that we can help you out to face the exams also. So these are the things which I'm going to have in the coming weeks. So hopefully next week we will have the right iliac fossa mass. So happy learning. Thanks everyone. Thanks Vasant, and thanks the KMC alumni for giving me the opportunity. Over to Girish for the next class. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
So with your permission, I'm going to sign off from this. Bye-bye.
Bye.